Today, we are principally here to look at Grimwild. This is a fantasy game from Oddity Press. It is framed as cinematic fantasy adventure. Here's some art. It's just the cover art, but in a different format. This is designed by J.D. Maxwell and illustrated by, I'm going to apologize ahead of time, Per Janke, or Janke. This is a open license game, CCBY, very cool. This is on the Moxie engine, which was a creation of some combination of this team. There's their website. They have some thanks to contributors. I need to first issue a correction because I thought that this was a Forge in the Dark game. It does not appear to actually be a Forge in the Dark game. I think it just uses a core resolution mechanic that has some similarities with Forge in the Dark. We'll get more into it. I just want to flag that up front because it does not talk about Forge in the Dark here, and I don't want to be wrong when I describe this game. So I heard some people talking about Grimwild probably a month or so ago. I missed the backer kit campaign, right, which is here. This ended in July. And they raised $41,830 from 590 backers. That's great. Good job. Right, we are in what some people have called like the era of the Dragon Slayer, which mostly just means there are a number of people who are interested in fantasy RPGs who are looking to try out new games. Right, there are people who are served by Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and keep playing it. There are people who like 5e from 2014 and they're not switching. There are people who are. And then there's a variety of people looking to check out other games. And I'm always interested in seeing what other people are doing in game design, especially when it is like adjacent or potentially orthogonal to what I'm working on, right? I've spent most of the last year and change working on Daggerheart, which is a fantasy adventure game. And I work a lot in Forge in the Dark, which seems like it is parallel or maybe a little intersects what they're doing here in Grimwild. So I skimmed through this book a few weeks ago. I retain very little. The thing I remember is that I like how it does countdowns or like depleting pools, and we'll get into that. If I didn't get off on problem solving, I never would have gotten onto it either. Yeah. So I cannot promise we're going to go through this whole book because this is a 140 book. That would be wild. 140 page free edition. There is a paid version of this game that has like 30 something extra pages. I have not bought this game. We're just looking at the free version. I'm going to make sure that we go and take a look at the website so that it's easy for folks to go and check out check this game out more if you want. It is available on DriveThruRPG, and we'll see the website and things like that. So we have playing with Moxie. This is describing our core engine. And then we're going to get rules quickly and other stuff. Check out this cool goblin. Okay. Buy Grimwild to unlock this chapter. Great. So it tells you what else you can get if you buy the full version, right? Not just the free version, because the free version was made as its own distinct thing, and they did a smart thing in layout of saying, here's what you get if you buy the full game. And here's some story kits. That's a lot of story kits. I'm curious what they mean by story kit. Right, because in Daggerheart, we have campaign frames, which maybe are somewhat similar. We'll take a look here. They have a Discord, you can see. Here's some art with the cool elf with like I think of this as sort of Roman, but what it actually is that this shield is a little bit like the shields that they use in the spear and shield duels in the Brad Pitt movie Troy. I don't actually know the historical period very well from an arms and armor standpoint, so I can't say that this is a Roman shield, or this is a Greek shield, right? Like, oh, it's specifically Trojan. No, I don't know that. Somebody got arrowed several times. Okay, here we go. Another thing I noticed when I was skimming through the game is that I think that this layout is really nice. It has some flavor to it, but it's very readable, right? We have a lot of white space here. I got some strong contrast. Looks like we might have chapter by chapter symbols, so that if you were skimming through or paging through the physical book, you would be able to tell which chapter you're on by the symbol that you're looking at. That's my guess, because I've seen similar things in other games. So we'll see where I am and where I am not correct. So we start immediately with, what is this game? Very good idea. Grimwild is a game of cinematic fantasy adventure. You go on quests, delve into dungeons, and explore the wilderness. This is a D&D, right? If D&D is a genre, this is a D&D game. D&D is not all games, and not all games are D&D, but D&D is so popular that it has stretched in its influence to become sort of coterminous or metonymous for/with fantasy adventure with adventurers, and you go into dungeons and fight monsters and get treasure, right? That's not all of epic fantasy. It's not all of sword and sorcery, but it is this kind of genre blob that a lot of people have an imagined version of, where its boundaries are closely coterminous with the way D&D is. Now, there's a lot of on-ramps and off-ramps for D&D, and there's different versions of D&D. There's different editions. There's, Eberron adds noir and pulp, right? And so those are different genre expectations, and then they're mixed in. So there's a lot of different... This stream is not about defining what D&D is, so I'm just going to stop there. Grimwild isn't a setting. So this is another game where they're not handing you a setting. We're getting a system, and I think the system's probably going to have some tonal expectations, because the game is called Grimwild, right? Grim is a note on tone. Grim Dark is the name of a fantasy subgenre. Interesting that it's become more of a fantasy genre, because Grimdark comes from a phrase in Warhammer 40,000. In the grim darkness of the future, there is only war, right? But then Grimdark got taken and applied to works by like George R.R. Martin and Joe Abercrombie and other folks to describe kind of a pseudo-nihilistic dark fantasy where everybody has feet of clay and so on and so forth. So they are referencing here a ensemble cast TV series, each session a new episode. I love my ensemble TV shows, so that has my attention. Hello, Prince Justin. Yes, the name definitely evokes a tone. Gameplay flows smoothly. This is a promise, right? It says, this is an experience we are going to deliver for you. The rules resolve actions quickly, favoring dramatic over the realistic, right? So that's also a note about tone and expectations, right? This is more rule of cool than rules as written, parentheses, the rules of physics in the real world, end parentheses. Significant creative freedom to add set dressing and even larger details into scenes to play off of, keeping the story moving forward and prioritizing common sense over detailed tracking. Okay. Common sense is a little bit of a loaded term. There's some sociology about it. Let's move right past it. I'm just going to flag that common sense is a little fraught. The story, that's wrong. I'm sorry, your grammar is slightly off. That's story possessive, not story is. It's fine. Every book has typos and grammatical errors. It's just that I noticed this very quickly. Digital products can be changed. It's all good. I understand what they're going for. As players, you work together to decide your adventuring party's identity, then make characters that fit well within it. Okay, so we are starting by talking about our party as a unit, and then we're looking at individual characters. Yes, editors are very important, not just in fiction. Editing in RPGs is very important. Good editors are a treasure, and you should appreciate their work and pay them a competitive rate as much as is possible, or trade in work that you can give to them, right? If somebody's going to edit your game, then you can do layout for them or something like that. Characters are revealed through play. You start with a clear concept that fits well within your party, but you don't necessarily need all the details up front. Focus on what sounds fun to bring into play. You can always use the tools the game gives you to add details about your past and connect the dots as they come up, leaving plenty of space to grow together into a cohesive, colorful party. So here they're saying you don't need to have everything figured out about who this character is at the beginning, right? It takes a little bit of the load off, but it also is maybe an exhortation or instruction to not figure everything out about the character ahead of time, right? You don't have to do all the work from the beginning. Hello, Triffity Mats. Things get dramatic. You're rewarded for playing into your traits in ways that complicate the situation, right? So we want you to make your life hard because that makes the game more fun. Inevitably sparks fly. Okay, so infighting between protagonists is explicitly something that the game is telling you is to be expected, if we look at it one way, or is something you want to happen, if we look at it another way. This is all cleanly resolved with quarrels. So this makes me think quarrels is a system, right? There's like a game system for resolving that. And that's interesting, right? We're telling you there's going to be PvP and we have a specific mechanic for it. Unscriven says that improvisational element is key for how I enjoy TTRPGs. Discovering who my character is rather than choosing ahead of time is a lot of fun. It makes their arc more resonant with the larger game. That is largely my experience and perspective as well. I created a kind of a Superman Martian Manhunter pastiche character named Tempo that I played in an actual play of Apocalypse Keys that Brandon O'Brien ran for Speculate, which was the last Speculate thing that I was in. And I came up with a strong concept for that character, but I left a lot of the details murky or undefined so that they could come into definition through play and in play. And that was a really fun, satisfying experience, especially because it was a recorded performance thing. So it's okay, I am challenging myself to flesh things out and to sharpen and then express my improvised ideas kind of in flow to add to this character and add to the narrative overall. It was a fun challenge. All right, last we have the story is a maelstrom of dice rolls and fun ideas, pushing and pulling on the narrative. From all the pushing and pulling on the narrative, storylines and side plots emerge. In spite of the tension, the choices you make about your party's arcs and the characters growing together over time give compelling reason to stay together and focused. Right? This is also telling you, like, you might have quarrels up here, but please don't split the party. It's a TV show that you're the main characters of, messy and fun and full of surprises, right? That's a good mission statement, right? It has to exist with all this other stuff, but this is giving you a pitch that says, hey, this game is for having these types of experiences. Yeah, I agree, Triffid. It is very frustrating when player expectations are opposed. Yeah, like you can take turns and share, right? If you have 5 people and nobody's play aesthetics are exactly the same, you can have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and rotate through. I agree with that. But there can be times when things are distinct enough that it can become really difficult. This is another reason why Session 0 and kind of play agreements and talking about lines and veils and content aims and all that kind of stuff is really important, because it helps you anticipate possible challenges. Or if you identify that people don't have identical play aesthetics, you can go into the game knowing, hey, we're going to have to be able to balance between what the different people are looking for from this game. Okay, getting started. Tabletop role-playing game. I am familiar with tabletop role-playing games. Thematically, Grimwild draws heavily on Dungeons & Dragons, especially rooted in 3rd edition onward. Inspiration was also taken from Dungeon World and its descendants. The Moxie system draws on character-driven games Biggest influences being Burning Wheel, Cortus Prime, Blades in the Dark, and Fate. So there's that Blades note. Burning Wheel, I think I can sort of see a little bit. Cortex Prime is not a system I'm as familiar with. Fate, I've played the Dresden Files role-playing game in a campaign in Indiana before we moved to New York. So I have some experience with Fate as well. So that gets us a little bit of a grounding mechanics-wise. To play, we will need, I'm going to probably skim through this. We need 4 to 66s and some D8s called Thorns. That's going to be interesting. Sheets, safety. I'm very glad that the game has a specific note about where you get your safety and calibration tools, or where you can get them. Pool. All right, so this is that diminishing countdown kind of thing. D66 tables, so these are random tables. Crucibles. These are D66 tables that provide a few words to smash together for inspiration. That's interesting. Interpret them literally or figuratively. Reroll if you need it. Made with Moxie. Yep. Those pages will be marked with the Made with Moxie logo. Okay, so this is gameplay overview. Moxie Cinematic Toolkit is what they're calling this here, right? So that plays into the description of the overall game as cinematic. I think it was cinematic adventure fantasy. As a group, form an adventuring party by choosing a few words that clearly say what your party is and what it's not. All right, so here we're going to go to our sheets. I'm going to look for the adventuring party sheet to see if there's a distinct one. These are our classes. This is also a little bit of a preview of what we've got here. So this looks like it is replicating or echoing the 12 core classes of D&D 5th edition. All right, adventuring party, yes. All right, so traits. Choose 2 you see your party as, and 1 you definitely aren't. Avengers, conquerors, disciples, explorers, heroes, mercenaries, mystics, outsiders, renegades, scoundrels, vassals, and wardens, right? So your group might be heroes and vassals, and you are not conquerors, right? You really want to emphasize the heroic, kind of brighter tone, like more optimistic tone. Or your group could be renegades and scoundrels who definitely aren't heroes. There's definitely some overlap. I think choosing 2 and then kind of opposing 1 gives you some space to flavor, right? So you could be heroes, but you're also scoundrels. But what you aren't is conquerors, or you might be explorers and outsiders, but you are not renegades, right? Outsider versus renegade. Outsider, you were never a part of the thing. Renegade, you exist in opposition or in tension with the thing. Yeah, triangulation. So this is interesting. And then we've got some other things that are listed on this party sheet, right? Growth arcs. What kind of growth does the party want? Struggle arcs. Come unraveled, doubt convention. So this is like internal struggles, maybe? Ambition arcs and bonds. So that's curious. We'll probably come back to this. Party building is very interesting to me. Adventurer path gives you a core talent. Assign. So sorry, I got ahead of myself. Adventuring party, great. Make characters by choosing 2 backgrounds that reflect your past, like your heritage and professions, along with an adventurer path that grants a powerful core talent. So adventurer path is like a class, I think. Assign stats, traits, and desires, then forge bonds with other PCs. Establish group and character story arcs, which you play toward to drive the story. Okay, so we come back to our character sheets. We look at the wizard, right? So that is backgrounds. Okay, so we're getting backgrounds from something else, and then we're going to put them on here, right? The backgrounds go here. These are traits and desires. So we have a pick list here, the 2 you are and 1 you're really not, that we saw in the adventuring party section. I think it's a good way of engaging with a pick list, because you're picking, right, to things to lean into and things to lean away from or push away from. As a player, describe what your character thinks, feels, and does. When you try to do something risky, you make an action roll, right? So here, this is saying only roll when you're doing something risky, not when you're doing something every day, right? So climb up a ladder, probably don't make an action roll. Climb up a ladder that is covered in oil, maybe you make a roll. Climb up a ladder while being fired at by archers, maybe you make a roll. When the GM puts you in direct danger, you can make a defense roll, right? So that's maybe a reactive roll, maybe a little bit more like what we might expect a saving throw to be in 5e. You can also make a montage roll to skip past parts you don't want to play out in detail. That's certainly interesting. Rolls are made with a handful of d6s. You can have a variety of results. 2 6s is a critical. So this part, the core of the resolution seems to be drawing from Forged in the Dark, right? Results of 2 6s or more is a crit, 6, 4, 5, 1 to 3. This is from my skimming earlier. Difficulty and damage add 1 or more d8s called thorns to your roll, which might cut the outcome down a level. If a Grim gets cut, it's a disaster, right? So Grim is the lowest result, but the lowest result you can normally get, but then if you have thorns, you can get a disaster, which is worse. Use creative freedom to add set dressing, right? So a little bit of shared narrative agency. Earn spark by introducing character-related complications called tangles, right? So tangles and thorns. Spend spark to gain a bonus on rolls. You get experience, which gives you levels, and that gives you talents. So, right, this is playing the game, running the game. As the GM, present dilemmas and drama, then let players come up with solutions. Keep the spotlight moving. Right, these are kind of like GM principles. Keep the spotlight moving to give everyone screen time and prompt the players to describe their actions. Those are 2 principles, really. Keep the spotlight moving to give and give everyone screen time, or keep the spotlight moving to give everyone screen time, and then secondly, prompt the players to describe their actions. That's probably a better division. Map the fiction to rules. Make rulings to fill the gaps. This is kind of 2 that's 1. Open the door wide for collaboration and enjoy the story. Right? So the GM's fun is a thing that we're looking for as well. Not just GM as servant, GM as like host provider. Use GM moves. Impact moves hit the PCs with direct consequences. They require prompting from foreshadowing. Grim rolls, or by spending suspense, gain from marking suspense moves, or holding off on making a prompted impact move, right? So suspense might parallel how fear works in Daggerheart, or threat in some games, right? Dark side points in the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game, bite in Slug Blaster. You have to make a suspense move, and then you can use the impact moves. That's an interesting structure. Make story rolls to disclaim decision-making and use the GM Crucible to help come up with ideas, right? That Crucible is the D66 roll a couple times and combine things idea. Use diminishing pools to create and track tension, and challenges to represent the toughest, most interesting obstacles PCs face. So I know we're going to get explanation here, but impact moves, prompting, seems like it's its own term, foreshadowing, suspense and suspense moves, story rolls, diminishing pools, and challenges. That's a lot of things that we're introducing here in 3 paragraphs about GMing. I know we'll unpack them, but what I'm thinking about right now is my mental overhead storage capacity, right? If we imagine I'm getting on a plane, right? A commercial airline in the US, overhead storage. There's only so much room in the overhead storage areas. I think about overhead storage as a way of expressing short-term memory capacity. And this has an impact on learning, right? There's only so many terms that I have like question marks about that I can hold in my head to be able to refer to quickly before I will have some of them just kind of pass out of my short-term memory, right? Can I hold on to all of these terms plus, right, perfect, messy, grim, disaster, thorns, spark, tangles? Every game has its own terminology. The way that these are presented makes me feel a little daunted because there's so many terms being introduced pretty close to one another. I think that it makes sense to have a, here's what you're going to expect as a player and what you're going to do. Here's what you're going to expect and do as a GM. It makes sense to have those very early. Having all the specific terms feels a little daunting, which then tells me that I'm going to hope that anytime one of these is reintroduced now, it's going to be more fully explained, and I'm not going to have to connect suspense to a challenge without both of them getting fully explained. Play with Moxie. Right, so this is their kind of core system. These also look like principles. Play cinematically. Play in good faith. All right, so I don't want to read everything here. So shared imagination space, managing the spotlight, and diving into narration. Narrative collaboration. I love narrative collaboration. So principle, play cinematically. Trust in the collaborative process. Use the camera, your shared imagination. Tell us what it looks like before and after your rolls. Okay. Play in good faith. Don't be a weasel. Don't be a weasel as instruction to players is something that I most associate with Blades in the Dark. I don't know if it was colloquially used before that in other games, but I do like it because it's saying, hey, don't try to just get one up on the game, right? Play the game, kind of try to meet the game where it is, do what your character would do, then let the GM map it onto the rules, is what we say. It says here. Don't overdo it trying to work your way into better rules. Separate player and character knowledge. This is don't metagame, sort of. Don't keep secrets from each other. Keep them from the characters. That I strongly agree with. As a player, be aware of what your character knows and doesn't know, and play toward both. Use the meta channel sparingly. This is a conversation about the game between players. It's unavoidable, but minimize it to keep that shared imagination in sync at the table. For anything longer than a quick question, call for a pause to talk things through, a clean break point to resume from later. Interesting. I don't do this. This is not how I GM. So I don't know that would necessarily create friction in me playing this game, but it is interesting that it flags, hey, do this as little as possible when I use it more consistently. But this seems like it's focusing on immersion, right? Shared imagination and sync, I might read as immersion. Know the rules. This game is free. Please know the rules. Play to tell a story. Think of the game as a series of improv prompts. Don't talk yourself out of fun. Open doors and step through them, right? Follow through. Work the spotlight. Grab the spotlight when there's a lull. Share the spotlight pass. Point the spotlight to see another PC's response or what they've been up to. Never steal the spotlight, right? So point the spotlight to see another PC's response is a move that I really like as a player, right? Where something will happen, and if like the attention moves to me, but I feel like I've gotten enough spotlight recently, or especially if I'm really interested with what another PC is up to, I may point the spotlight from me while I have people's attention to another character to see what they're up to or how they're reacting to something. Don't play to win, play to tell stories. Yeah, this is kind of a fairly broad sentiment among TTRPGs. Work toward the same goal to tell a great story where everyone's character has a chance to grow. Failure isn't losing, it's just another opportunity to have a great scene. Frame that and put it on my wall. Play characters that grow. right? So we have a specific focus on growth and change for characters. Leave lots of blank space. Don't be afraid to change. Don't be afraid to say the name. Some aspects of your character stay the same. Sorry, say the name. I was like, say the name of the move. They're like that. I was too apocalypse pilled. Sorry. Don't be afraid to stay the same. Make time for smaller moments. Most importantly, do stuff. Right? And we've got some people doing stuff. All right. Here's an example character. Name, player, distinctive features. Right? 3 short descriptors. We have some stats, some kind of conditions, injury stuff, story, spark, vex, fight, flight, freeze, freak out. This is different than, so the science that I hear most recently, we used to talk about fight or flight reflex. Then people added freeze. The 4th one I've heard described recently is fawn, as in fawning over someone, right? You're trying to appease them to get out of a dangerous situation versus what this is describing. So backgrounds, right? This character was a noble, they're a warrior. Wises, this I think is coming from Burning Wheel, right? Which has skills that are X-wise, right? So you can be farmer wise. So wises, diplomacy, influential contracts, luxuries. A warrior's wises are battle plans, military contacts, war stories. I wonder if every background has contacts. That could make sense. Gem, this character is curious and honorable, but they are not quiet. They want justice and knowledge, but they don't want renown. Unscripted, I love when RPG rulebooks offer well-considered gaming advice. A hard lesson I learned playing Blaze was that rules alone can't make someone a good storyteller. True story, right? There is a trick in writing RPG books, is that they are a little bit craft books, right? Craft of storytelling books. But it's way beyond the scope of any individual RPG to teach someone how to tell stories from not zero, but from a low base level of, okay, what if you are a 16-year-old who has never had even informal training in storytelling, right? You've just absorbed rules of storytelling from play and from experiencing narratives, right? Reading, watching film, listening to audio dramas and things like that, right? What level of understanding how to tell stories do you expect or demand of potential players when you're writing a role-playing game book? I don't think there's one right answer. Some RPG books are written with the expectation that they are not the first RPG you play, possibly that they are not even the 10th RPG that you play. I think especially in specific, very generative design communities, right? Story games or OSR or like Powered by the Apocalypse, when there's a lot of games that are in dialogue with one another, I find that many of those games do not have much in the way of sections that say, here's what an RPG is, or here's how to play an RPG. Right? They're just, cool, we're going to assume some things about your knowledge, and given that, here's some new stuff. All right, we have character bonds, complex rivalry, low-key doubts, tense affection, right? So we have descriptor, core element of bond, right? Low-key doubts is different than tense doubts, is different than complex doubts. Tense affection, right? Even if this were charged affection, right? That gives a little bit of a note of tension. These having 2 elements is very interesting. I'm going to want to see more about that. All right, and here's just a little bit from the class section, right? Core talent is a base class feature. Choose a fighting style you have mastered: brawling, dual wielding, one-handed weapons, ranged weapons, thrown weapons, two-handed weapons. You have a mastery die, a special D6. When you fight in that style, take +1d, that mastery die. If the mastery die is a 6, it counts as a critical. If it's already a critical, take spark, right? So that's a special resource. So this, if we're looking to 5th edition as a comparison, this feels like the Battle Master dice the mastery dice in 5th edition, that fighter subclass. Making that a basic element is a thing that I hear people commonly talk about as a thing they suggest for the fighter class in 5e, so that makes sense. That die being a 6 gives you a critical on its own. I think that's a cool way of representing that mastery. Path talents. So these are different moves you can gain, right? Each session you have a bulwark pool from armor, other defenses. When you get bloodied or dropped from physical advantage, roll the pool. If dice remain, ignore the damage. So we're going to get to the pools thing here in a bit. Let's skip forward now. Story arcs, right? Group arc, and then a character arc. So your character has an arc you're pursuing, and the group has an arc you're pursuing. And here's our experience track. Core rules. This is like our core rule, well, not review. We're getting everything here. I realize that we're on page 14. We're 1/10 of the way through the book, and it's been almost 45 minutes. So just flagging here that I probably will not get through this whole book today. For one, I have found that between 60 minutes and 90 minutes, I start noticing that my voice is straining. I'm feeling it a little bit early now. So I'm going to try to take my time, drink lots of water, and so on. I want to get at least through core rules and a little bit of like how to play at least, and maybe some look at one or two of the classes / playbooks. Right, core mechanic. When things get risky, roll to see what happens. Grab d6s. Right, on a 6, you get a perfect outcome. On a 4 or 5, you get a messy outcome. On a 1 to 3, you get a grim outcome, and that's based on your highest result. Critical on 2 or more 6s. On a critical, you get greater effect, a secondary effect, or you set up a follow-up. A disaster happens when a grim, a 1 to 3, is cut by a thorn. Thorns over here. 1 or 2 d8s added to your roll by the GM to reflect a tougher than normal task. Each 7 or 8 on a thorn cuts a roll's outcome by 1 step. So, if I roll 3 dice, let's go down to our example, right? We get 1 to 3 dice from our stat, possibly 1d from spark, and we get some number of thorns. Right, so if we get 3 dice and 1 thorn, and we roll them, and those dice are 2, 5, 6, and then the thorn die is a 7. Because the thorn die was a 7 or 8, it's going to cut the outcome. We add a 6. That outcome goes from perfect to a 4 or 5, which becomes messy. Right? A thorn gives cut and goes to here. You can go all the way up to critical, and you can go all the way down to disaster, with messy being in the middle. Damage to PCs also adds thorns to a roll, but they don't count toward making it impossible. Right? If you have 3 thorns or more, the task can't be done, right? There's only so much difficulty before you just don't get to roll. Smooth flow. If a grim threatens to grind the story to a halt, the GM can keep things moving. You get what you want, but in a way that makes things much worse. If a roll somehow turns out to have no effect, the guard was already dead, you learn new info or set up for a follow-up. Okay. I feel like if a roll somehow turns out to have no effect is separate than if a grim threatens to grind the story to a halt. So I feel like I kind of want these sentences to be more separated from each other. But the overall prompt here is smooth flow. Don't let your story get ground down by this. Don't let your story get ground down by that. Teamwork. You can help another PC on a roll. Give them 1d and share the risk, right? So if there's a consequence that creates a problem for the one PC, if you're helping, you're also going to have to face that. You can assist when another PC's action prompts an impact move. You make a 1d defense roll for them, right? I think that's the... No, that's a defense roll. I don't know what impact moves are yet. When you share the risks, you open yourself up to consequences. Yes, that's fine. I know that from Blades. When 3+ PCs work together, the GM picks who rolls the action. Sometimes the most skilled, sometimes the least. The other PCs assist, right? So 3 PCs, everybody's assisting. Each assists adds 1d, and then they all share the risk. This is simpler than the lead a group action rule in Blades, but it's still pretty streamlined. Set up when a previous action makes a follow-up more effective, you assist without risk. You roll 1d as a normal assist, but don't share the risk, right? I'm going to lead the guards away by, let's see, I need something that's actually a setup and not just an assist. I'm going to go over to the bush and make noise to distract the guards, right? And I'm going to roll to see how well I do that, or if I get complications for doing that. Having done it successfully, now that's a setup, and the next player, right, trying to sneak by would take that 1d from the setup. Dice rolls, defense rolls. Roll to avoid incoming trouble, but only when not caused by your own action. Right, so not, I go to distract the guards. Oh no, I get noticed. I make a defense roll. Instead, you go to distract the guards, and the GM introduces a complication. Actually, there was already somebody in that bush from a different faction trying to sneak in, and they stab you. Make a defense roll. Maybe that's one we could do it. Defense is cinematic, a reaction out of your hands. The GM picks the stat and your PC's likely reaction, vulnerabilities, and what feels right for the moment. This keeps it varied. You can't always use a strong stat. So this defense can be imperfect, right? You avoid the brunt of the trouble, light in consequences. You fail to avoid the trouble. The GM follows through. So this is tricky because you can have a null result, right? Well, so the defense roll has to be fully prompted by the GM. But then you can have a null result. But it's a null result for the player, and you can have a null result for the GM. I get what they're going at. I want some examples to unpack this a little bit more, because this is a little bit like action roll versus the threat roll in Core Blades versus Deep Cuts, but not quite. Diminishing pools. So here's our pool thing. I'm glad we at least got to this, because I think it's interesting. Pools are a set of d6s used to track things like time, resources, or effort. Yeah, it is inevitable that GMs need hard moves. Size of a pool is 4d for short, 6d for middle, 8d for long. At 0d, an event occurs, a situation ends, or a resource is depleted. Make sure to reflect the fiction, right? If no dice are dropped from a task pool on a messy roll, instead take a secondary effect. Okay, that's a separate thing. Drop 1d from the pool when rolling. I want examples before I'm getting these exceptions. When triggered, roll the die pool and drop 1d for each 1 to 3 result. At 0d, the pool depletes. Pools can be applied flexibly, right? Timer pools. How long until reinforcements? Danger looms. Overcome a threat, right? Task pools, effort to overcome tasks. So you roll. So it's 8d escape the guard, or 4d ballroom brawl. I make an action roll to try to overcome this challenge. If I succeed, I roll the pool. But if no dice are dropped from the pool on a messy or perfect action roll, instead take a secondary effect. They spell a secret, some mooks die. If the roll was only 1d, you can instead push yourself to drop the last die. So if you get a pool down to 1d, you can push yourself to just finish the die pool. Drop 1d from the pool before rolling it when a talent tells you to do so. You have potency, or you take the greater effect critical bonus, right? So the pool automatically shrinks when you have extra effect. Sorry? Vantage. This is like position. Proper vantage opens up possibilities and gives the freedom to declare story details. Okay. But this is also, like, this is fiction. This is a position extending to fictional position, right? Your character's frame of reference, the sum of your backstory talents, and the current fiction. Everything on your sheet and what's affecting you in the story. When a question arises, hey, you can just do this, right? As a thief, you probably have a lockpick. You're a doctor. You were a doctor. You can just sew somebody up. You're assumed to have the things for your class. Details. Use the details as creative inspiration. Okay. Character details, right? So this is what they're talking about. Your background. Traits and desires. We looked at that on the sheet. Features. Distinctive features. These are like outward features. Talents are like class abilities or playbook moves. Stats are rated from 1 to 3. Right? We have brawn, agility, wits, and presence. Brawn and agility are the physical stats. Wits and presence are the mental stats. So your bond with each PC, you match an intensity with a nature, or write your own, right? So you can have growing affection or playful affection. You can have growing doubts or playful doubts, right? So with 6 and 6, that's a lot of different potential combinations for bonds. And, right, you could shift, right? Could you shift the intensity to represent the change in your character's relationship? Yeah, you can change a bond anytime. Bonds are your strongest view of the other PC and not necessarily reciprocal. Your tense doubts meets their playful rivalry. When it changes, give a short vignette, better if together, and the other PC takes spark, right? So you get a mechanical reward for changing and resolving bonds so that your relationships are dynamic. Set dressing. Add minor common sense details freely, make assumptions, and add set dressing to scenes to play off of to keep things flowing dynamically. Tangles. Character-driven complications you introduce to a scene and have to follow up on. In return, you take spark, right? This is like player-driven devil's bargains is one way of thinking about it, right? I want to introduce a tangle, and then I get spark for it, right? Unwise your decisions your PC would likely make. You toss aside your sword to keep things fair. You poison the general's wine, getting your revenge. Personal motivations over group goals, right? You're introducing problems. Story. This is a resource. This is like a dramatic, pure cinematic momentum. Each session you have 2 story. Spend it to add story details that go beyond set dressing, creating new opportunities or shifting a scene in your favor. So this is like drama dice. This is narrative currency. I have been in the RPG world for a long time, which is why I can now reference that somewhere in the territory of more than 15 years ago, I gave a presentation at an academic conference about narrative currency systems in tabletop RPGs. I was mostly looking at drama dice from 7th Sea and a couple of other mechanics from around that time because I am that kind of a nerd. All right, so you can add gear, context, or backstory. The wizard was your mentor. You just have the thing. The guard falls asleep. There's a secret door. There's a town over those hills. The king falls ill, right? So these will let the player make a move that's more like what a GM would do, where you're getting authority over the story world outside of your own character in getting to dictate or change the world state. Added details must fit your vantage at least as a stretch or tie to a story arc. So there's caveats on this. It's not just spend a story, make a move like you're a GM. It is extending your narrative authority from where it is by a stretch. Right? There are gray zones. I get the idea here. I'm not sure whether I like having this caveat, because there's a world in which it is, hey, take cool shared narrative authority. Oh, but you can't be trusted to do it all the way. Or, take shared narrative authority, but not too much. Just a little bit, right? Just don't go too much out of your lane. With something like this, I don't know that there's one right answer certainly not one right answer for every group and every player, right? Some people don't want, as a player, to have more narrative authority. They just want to have their person and focus on their person and be that person. There are other people who really, really like shared narrative authority. Based on my taste, I don't know how I feel about the way that this caveat is framed, but I will need to play the game, right? It's always better to get to play the game and see how it feels in action. Story arc. These are evocative phrases that give your PC and group a thematic direction. Pick an arc. Take spark by resolving an arc with a meaningful moment, however big or small it is. This could mean achieving your goal, adjusting it for the next step, or moving on from it entirely. Group arcs unite players around a theme. Story arcs signal to the GM that you want drama, dilemmas, and opportunities to arise around them. Right? So these are a little bit, it's player flags to the GM. A little bit, it is a sort of like a character key in something like Lady Blackbird, but not keys to get experience. It's a key to get a player resource. Here we have another thing that needs to get edited real quick. There's a V that doesn't need to be there. That's fine. Typos happen. You take spark by resolving an arc. The rhyming there, not my favorite, but it's basically unavoidable because of how the terminology works, and that's fine. However big or small it is, what this means, right, is that this is a focusing lens for the players and the GM of like, wait, what is this game about, right? What are we doing right now? When in doubt, kind of return to your story arcs, right? If your story arc is explore the world, okay, well, that's a guiding principle. It's like a lodestar for our group. And you can have story arcs for your group and your character. So your character arc, that is a flag to the GM. Here are the things I want for my character specifically. Your group arc is a flag. This is what we want for the group. For struggles, get group permission. Yeah. Right. Flirt with betrayal. If that's a character arc, that could have a big impact on other players and their characters. Okay, damage. Lesser damage. Take +1T on the next roll with that stat, then clear the mark, right? So this is fleeting damage. You take a thorn on your next roll with that stat, and then you're fine, right? You get a little dizzied, you get a little winded, you get a little starstruck. If that stat is already marked, mark its paired stat instead for physical, brawn, and agility. If both are marked, take the related harm. Wait, if both are marked and you take damage, or if both are marked at all? I'm going to need some clarity on that, right? If a stat is already marked, mark its paired stat. The way that these are structured, that makes me think that if both are marked, then you take the related harm, and that's a third state, right? It's 1, 2, 3. Marks are often combined with another mark or other consequences when inflicted directly. You also take a mark when you push yourself. Right? Marks lead to harm. A hard hit to your body or mind, general damage that doesn't need to be tracked or detailed. This is the default damage from an impact move. Physical damage leaves you bloodied. Mental damage leaves you rattled. Bloodied and rattled each inflict +1T on all rolls, not just the temporary one, right, when you have a mark. Getting bloodied or rattled a second time leaves you dropped. You're out of the scene. Make a story roll to see if you're out temporarily, taking condition, or wind up dead. Wow. just a 2D roll to be dead. That seems pretty intense. We'll have to come back to that. The bloodied and rattled are the default. Especially dangerous attacks with high risk can lead straight to dropped, right? This is just flagging. You don't always have to follow this flow chart. Low risk situations might leave you with a mark by default, right? Just one mark that's fleeting. Conditions. These often combine with harm and can be, right? Here are some different conditions. Take +1 T, a thorn, when condition specifically hinders a roll. It can also make an attempt impossible, right? If you have other thorns. Conditions clear when it makes sense. You have a final say on long-term and permanent conditions, right? The player. Vex. An intense flash of emotion, like anger, fear, or confusion. Vex is inflicted as a consequence, sometimes in addition to a mark. You can also spend sparks to take Vex instead of rattled. Place of rattled. Which one's rattled is mental. Spend sparks to take Vex instead in place of rattled. So you can spend your spark, right, the special resource, but only on rattled, not on bloodied. That feels a little fiddly. I do think that I like Vex as an underused word. I agree, Prince Justin. So Vex has four possibilities, right? This is that fight, flight, freeze, freak out. Interpret the response. Your PC is driven by emotion, but you decide how it plays out, right? It's, hey, you're going to have to take an intense move here, but you're the one who gets to decide what that looks like. Vex clears pretty quickly. So recovery. When you get bloodied or rattled, start a 4D pool to track healing. When you heal harm, roll a pool. At 0D, track the harm. Treatment requires more stuff. Marks can't benefit from treatment. They just get healed by time. Rest is a stretch of time between significant action. A night's camp, a week's travel. Paced for drama, not realism, right? After a rest, clear all marks and heal. Now, all marks and then roll pools, not automatically clear harm. Downtime is an extended break. Fully heal and reset per session talents. Right, so you fully heal, don't roll the pools, just get rid of them. After they pick and deplete one, faction pools. The GM has pools. Faction pools. I'm excited about that. You can roll a montage to achieve something non-pivotal, right? I want to get onto the montages as well. We're going to need a montage. So, right, taking a pause here, we're 19 pages in out of 140 pages. We're definitely not going to get all the way through it, but there's several things here already that I think are very interesting. There's some that I'm not super sure about, but there's some cool ideas that are going in different directions or using different implementations than what I have seen in either Forged in the Dark games or in fantasy adventure games, right? There's some different implementations, there's some different approaches to things, and that's all really cool. What I most want at this point is I want to be able to snap. I'm going to snap away from the mic, right? I want to be able to snap my fingers and have somebody that knows this game run it for me so that I can get my hands around it. For a game like this, I definitely would rather play first and then GM it after getting to play, because the experience for a GM is just really different than the experience for a player because of the asymmetry in how the mechanics operate in a lot of these things, right? There's more asymmetry in something like this, from what I can tell, or in Daggerheart or in Blades in the Dark, than there is in a more traditional game like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or like a Call of Cthulhu maybe, right? A lot of the trad games world outside of D&D, I just don't know because I mostly don't play trad games. Parentheses, trad versus indie versus story game, so on and so forth, is an abstraction, right? Oh, but XYZ game that you said you like is trad. No, let's move past that conversation. Odds and ends, potency. This is bonus effect, right? It seems like, right? You have amazing effect. The ability to pull off jaw-dropping feats. When you have potency on a task, you ignore thorns from difficulty, but not damage, and you can attempt normally impossible tasks. A potent feat could be like group action, something a team of people could accomplish with an action. Okay, right, so if I'm potent on my own for feats of strength, I could lift a boulder. Stretching limits, something just beyond normal human limitations. Oh, okay, right. So that's also lift a boulder. Leap a massive gap, endure fire, tell ridiculous lies. Mystical, feats that don't fit in with the above but have a similar narrative impact. Befriend a wild tiger, use echoes to create a rock slide. Okay, right. Mystical is also like kind of stretching the bounds of feasibility. If you have potency on a normally +0 thorns roll, you automatically succeed instead. If it's normally +1T, it has greater effect if you don't roll a grim, right? So I could get a 4 or 5 when I have potency and 1 or 2 thorns, and I have greater effect, right? So I could, if I have my 3 dice and 1 thorn, I roll all my dice and I get the same thing, right? I get 2, 4, 6, and an 8, let's say, right? The thorn takes my 6 and knocks it down to a 4 or 5, but because I had potency, it's a greater effect, as if a critical, even though I got a 4 or 5. But because I got a 4 or 5, there will be some kind of complication. There's a gray zone between draw-dropping and too much. As a general rule, something +3T can be attempted, but something +4T is too far, right? So there are limits even on potency. Power pools, right? Some things you use a pool. You can roll fewer dice to risk losing less. So, okay. So if I have an item that will let me make a roll using those items, a power or some talents, rolled in part of or instead of a stat, right? So if I could just roll my bulwark talent, I can take all 3 dice if I'm fresh, or I could say I'm just going to roll 2 of my dice, right? Or if I use a cleric domains thing here, there's 60. I could roll only 4 because I don't need it. You know, if I don't need as many dice, I'm not risking as many dice because you discard a die for every 1 to 3 you roll when you use a pool. There are buffs. Quarrels, right? Here's our PC versus PC conflict rule. Make sure all players agree to the quarrel. Clearly state the stakes for winning and losing. Each player rolls 2d and the highest wins, right? And 5 beats 4. So even within the result bands, higher number is better. Others can assist or they can join at 2d with their own agenda. On a tie, compromise, or keep quarreling. The winner narrates how they won, then the loser narrates how they handle losing. The results of a quarrel are final. Both sides take spark. So, right, there's a little bit of an implicit, there's a heuristic here. Have a bunch of quarrels between your player characters, and you're going to have an engine for constantly getting spark. Thanks for coming, Triffity Mats. See you around. Right. If we play a group of bickering adventurers where we have quarrels pretty often, we will then get spark, and we can spend that spark to do amazing things. Now, I would say that if I'm the GM and I feel like the player characters are farming quarrels, where the conflict between the PCs is not meaningful, or it doesn't feel meaningful enough, I might question that. But if the players are playing honestly, right, they're not being weasels, and they go, okay, yeah, we're just going to have a group that's bickering all the time, right, and they're going to have a lot of quarrels, and they're going to be consequences from it, right? Bruises, not bloodied. Hurt feelings, not vex. So you're not necessarily automatically giving mechanical penalties for losing these quarrels, but they are theoretically adding intensity to the emotional relationship between characters, right? It's fuel on the fire. So pushing yourself, you expend extra effort. After using the talent, mark the related stat. Talents that require you to push yourself can be activated without a mark once per session, right? I think that's like the talent has a little box over on the side that says push, right? You get your free push. That's my interpretation. Interrupt. Make an action roll to try to stop an impact move. This requires a specific talent. Okay. Always. If you have the ability to always succeed, it holds true unless the GM makes a counter move. A strong NPC trait is in play or other extenuating circumstances arrive. In short, always means 95% of the time, right? The GM can make an exception. I'm curious about counter moves. Beginning and ending sessions. You have a recap. Every player takes spark at the beginning of a session. The GM recaps. Spark carries over and story resets every session. So if you didn't have spark already at the end of last session, you gain it at the beginning of your session. After each session, take 1 XP. You start at level 1. The GM can award 1 bonus XP for a standout session for a slower pace. That's leveling up thing. Spellcasting. This is another thing that the game advertises as having a specific way of doing things. That it's meant to be really flexible. Spells are cast using touchstones, key terms like spell names, godly domains, or item descriptions. You interpret these on the fly, defining the permissions and limitations of your magic when you cast. Each source clearly defines its touchstones, casting methods, and costs, right? When you get something that will let you do magic, it tells you its touchstones, which then create its constraints. Magic has 4 magnitudes: cantrips, spells, potent spells, and rituals. Determine the magic's magnitude by comparing the final result, not the method, to what can be achieved by non-magic action roll, the narrative impact, not the result. So you compare the final result to the narrative impact. Final result is used to judge most cases, seeing if the magic is replicating. Oh, okay, no. You can compare the final result, or you can compare the narrative impact. Final result to what you could do with a non-magic action roll. So, right, the magnitude is how much more are you getting mechanically, or I guess it's like right, mechanically and fictionally, right? Final result, narrative impact. I want some examples. Right, so many examples. Looks like there's an example down here. Great. Narrative impact is used to judge spellcasting without mundane equivalents. Right. To ensure that magic and non-magic means have the same overall impact on the story. Right? Because some of your characters are not going to have magic. GM uses the guideline. Cantrips are similar to something that doesn't require a roll. They should feel flavorful. Spells are similar to an action roll, impactful but not dominating a scene. They should feel useful. Potent spells are similar to a group effort, right? Potency, effort over time, or a single effort with potency. Ta-da! They should feel powerful. And then rituals, something else, right? We're missing that 4th category. Example, transforming a cat into a dog temporarily is a spell. As the GM feels the narrative impact within the scene is similar to a normal action. If there was little to no impact in the scene, it might be a cantrip. However, turning it into a tiger is definitely a potent spell, right? Because of a tiger is going to make a bigger impact than a dog or, cat to a tiger. Yeah. All right, so we have cantrips, right? This is just unpacking more stuff. Cantrips are set dressing. Cantrip utility lets you flavor other action rolls with cantrips. Okay. Spells have effects equal to an action roll. Just like sticking an arrow into a bugbear, a spell can blast it with flames or enchant their ally to backstab them. Result, the bugbear is dead. Just like picking a lock or smashing it apart, a spell can melt through it with acid or let you phase through the door. Result, you get past the lock. Just like outplaying someone in a game, a spell can read your opponent's mind or commune with your ancestors for help. Result, you win the match. Potent spells. accomplish more than a normal spell, they give potency and broaden vantage. A potent spell can achieve effects equal to an entire group. You can attempt draw-dropping effects. And normally, right, this is as potency. Normally fighting this group of goblins would be extremely difficult, +2 thorns, but a potent spell Fireball is like a whole group fighting them. +2 thorns goes to 0 thorns plus greater effect. Normally someone couldn't bust down this thick stone wall, but a potent spell Thunderous Boom can do it. You can attempt something that would normally be impossible. Normally your nemesis would never help you, but the potent spell Charm could convince them. Okay? I guess rituals are just taken care of, are discussed entirely somewhere else, because they're not in this structure. Touchstones. Spellcasting ability comes with touchstones and all magical effects which must logically align with them, making sense and feeling natural. If it feels like a reach, it's beyond the touchstone's bounds. Flaming can burn or illuminate, but can't calm someone. Dazzling can blind or distract, but can't mend objects. Warding can create barriers, but can't attack. So an example. You cast Flaming Claw as a spell at the goblins, aiming for a huge claw to grab one, ignite it, and hurl it into the rest. This fits the touchstones, but your intent, harming multiple goblins at once, might work as a spell on a bunch of mooks, but those are some tough goblins. Okay. You have to choose to target just one or cast a potent spell to pull off the full effect, right? Affecting a whole group is potent. Now, this is saying that these goblins are tougher than goblins. So it's not just it's a group, it's also that they're tougher. That feels like 2 degrees of potency being required. So I'm not sure about that. The GM can veto spells that don't align with your touchstones. They can also instead allow it, but inflict a thorn or collateral effects when it's pushing your touchstones, but not completely implausible. A slime wall spell can slow enemies, but has trouble completely blocking them, +1 thorns. A dominion domain spell can command someone to help, but it can't cause wounds. Yeah. A wand of invisibility can make objects disappear, but it can't make sounds vanish. You want to try and grab a treasure chest and haul it across the chasm. Right. So you're going to cast Flaming Claw spell to do it. Discussing with the GM, you decide that the claw has a physical form, but since it's on fire, it'll scorch anything it touches. The GM says that the chest will be 4D on fire, right? That's a pool. This is just a spell, since you could get across the chasm with an action. Examples. Some touchstones and how their effectiveness increases with the magnitude of magic, right? So a shimmering vision could be a flash of light at cantrip level, a simple illusion at spell level, a complex illusion at potent spell, and a permanent illusion at ritual. Reaper Patron could summon hellflies as a cantrip, summon an imp as a spell, call a hellhound as a potent spell, and summon a demon as a ritual, right? So we have the type of touchstone it is, like its description, right, is one axis, and then we have the magnitude of the spell, cantrip through ritual. This means that you don't need to have as many spells, right, because each of them has its touchstone, but then you get flexibility with it. I really like this structure as I understand it so far, because it gives you the flexibility while still having some specificity. The creativity thrives within limitations, yes. Spellcasting rulings, right? Here's a bunch of how we are going to apply and interpret magic stuff. Rituals, right? This is the 4th level category that we didn't get as much description on earlier. Rituals can accomplish magical effects far beyond what can be done with even potent spells. Equal to the labor of an entire team of people over an extended period, right? Group and time. Effects that have a significant impact on the world or push the very limits of impossibility. Casting a ritual consists of 3 parts. Possess a source of magic with the relevant touchstones, anchor the ritual to the physical and metaphysical realms, complete the ritual's rites to finalize its casting. You need a source, you have to anchor, and then you have to do it right. 2 or 3 anchors like those on the right are best. Okay, so to do this ritual, you're going to need a source of magic. You're going to need auspicious timing and a circle of casters. Or you're going to need to harness energy, and you're going to need sanctified ground. You need a specific helper, and you need exotic ingredients. So a binding ritual needs 9 chanters, a circle of perfectly round stones, and a sacrificial end, right? 2 to 3. Here's a big example. An enormous fire is raging across the countryside, and your party seeks to stop it with a ritual of torrential rains. You realize the risks in getting the ritual wrong, but you have no choice. First, you have to convince both a water elemental and an air elemental, circle of casters, right? This is an anchor, to help. Then lead them high atop a mountain overlooking the land, enchanted location, right? Specific location. You gather everything and begin the rites, but at the mountaintop, the elementals begin to fight, complicating the ritual. This adds a thorn to your rule. Just then, the tribe of the Knoll shaman who's been starting the fires arrives to stop you, right? So this is, you're trying to do a ritual, it gets harder, and then there's a complication. Treasure, loot. Treasures are minor, major, and mythic. Right? I'm a little bit less interested in loot, so I'm probably going to skim through this a little bit. It looks like it engages with some other things, and that's good. Arcana are rare artifacts of power. They grant vantage, right? They give you special fictional positioning. And depending on their scale, they might grant certain scales of magnitudes of magical effects. So designing and listing arcana, examples of play. I love a good example of play. Now, I'm not going to read this whole thing aloud, but I am going to note a couple of things. We have sidebars here that are kind of more explicitly addressing the mechanics or the mechanical processes that are involved. I think that's a really good way of doing an example, because you can just give the full example and then you can unpack things while still maintaining this flow of information. So it looks like it is 3 pages long, 4 pages long. Is this all one? I don't know if this is one example of play. Anyway, there's three something pages worth of example of play. Alas, Horatio, I shoot magical tentacles. And some Snicker Snack. GM toolkit. All right. That was all one chapter, right? We're in the second chapter now with a new sigil. Running Grimwild. So we go directly into GM toolkit. And so making a character and playing the game, all one chapter. GM toolkit. That is getting to GMing faster than I would expect. Story rolls. Roll to disclaim decision-making, right? I'm not going to decide what happens. Let's let the dice decide. How does this NPC react? What happens off screen? How good or bad something that just happened is. You can also collapse any roll back to a story roll when there's no specific mechanic. I'm guessing roll, right? I'm not sure about collapse any rule when there's no specific mechanic to map it to. Well, a rule would have a mechanic, so I'm guessing this maybe is supposed to be roll. Roll dice based on the odds, right? 1D is bad odds, 2D is even odds, 3D is good odds. On a messy result, it's okay, but there's a catch. It's the ideal situation, right? So you have we have ways of scaling. We have how likely or how high are the odds, and then what are the results? GM Crucible, right? So what's inside the temple? It's a dwindling wasteland. Oh, no, but inside the temple, that doesn't make sense. There's a wasteland. Oh, maybe it's like bigger on the inside. Well, maybe that works. What if it's a dwindling archive? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Right? This is just a quick idea engine thing. This doesn't have, right? It's 1, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? 6 by 6. And then another 6 by 6, but I don't know exactly what they mean by rolling. I'm guessing there's a version of this somewhere else that has the numbers. GM moves. Story moves set up scenes and pace the game. Make these moves as you like at any time. Suspense moves help the players out in some way or escalate tension. Take suspense when used. Make these moves with good timing, right? So when you take a suspense move, you gain the suspense resource. So that is wind up and then the punch. But you have to wind up first before you take the punch, I think, based on what we read earlier. Impact moves deal significant consequences, crank up the tension, and make the world feel powerful. Make these moves when prompted. Okay, so we need prompting for impact moves. Prompt, a trigger for you to make an impact move, caused by things like grim or messy action results, a depleted pool, an unaddressed foreshadow move, or by spending suspense. So prompt is the trigger for an impact move, and impact moves are hard moves. Suspense. Gain suspense by skipping a prompted impact move or by making a suspense move. So you decide that you'd rather not go all out with an impact move right now, so you take suspense, you make a suspense move so that it will land more effectively in the narrative later. That lingering suspense builds tension, ready to strike later. Yeah, so there is a currency. It doesn't appear to be as, it doesn't seem to work quite like fear does in Daggerheart. It is a little bit maybe more like bite. There's overlap, but it's more a way of remembering. This is how many times I've pulled my punches, and then it's a promise on following through on that. Or if you don't want to think about it as pulling your punches, it's times when the GM has kind of has said something bad is coming, and then you go, here it is, here it is, here it is. Consequences. So these are kind of result of roll consequences. Splitting it, you can break big consequences into smaller ones. You can hit multiple PCs or NPCs. You can think off screen. Something doesn't happen here, it happens elsewhere. You can use pools for countdowns or things like that. Framing danger when it's not the result. Declaring high risk before a roll signals severe stakes, death or worse. Low risk shifts outcomes into lighter territory, right? So this is a little bit like position and effect in Force in the Dark. Taking suspense. When nothing comes to mind, skip the impact move and take suspense instead. Story moves. Foreshadow, right? So foreshadow is not actually a suspense move. It's necessarily. Foreshadow, question, set the scene, spotlight, wrap it up. So yeah, they're using, right? They have GM moves. This still feels like it's within some of the structuring of Power by the Apocalypse, right? Because Force in the Dark carries forward a lot of the GM philosophical structure from Power by the Apocalypse. Grimwild dividing GM moves into these different subcategories. Story moves, foreshadowing, questioning, setting the scene, spotlight, wrap it up. Suspense moves are telegraphing danger, and then impact moves are delivering danger. They are hard moves, right? So we have kind of a gradation, and we're naming these groups to be able to identify them and distinguish them from one another. I don't hate it. I think that there's certainly the possibility for uncertainty where like, oh, there's a time when a question could be a harder move, but I don't dislike the way that this is structured. We have some examples, which I appreciate. Story moves keep the narrative flowing, the action engaging, and things moving when they stall out. It's more satisfying when players have a fair warning about trouble. The GM is also playing the game just by different rules, right? We're talking about the asymmetry, but we're saying that it's fair, basically. This is some more guidance. Suspense moves. Right, use these moves with cinematic timing. Bridge. Resolve a problem the PCs face or use exposition to connect dots. You hear from above, need some help down there? Or it suddenly makes sense, the Baron is a vampire. Bridge, build up, cutaway, entangle, recap. Interesting. Very chin scratch. This is positive interesting. I'm digging some of how this information is being framed or presented or like structured and labeled. Suspense moves. However, use them carefully. Overuse can get frustrating, right? Entangle. Prisoner knows where your mother is. Interesting. I'm going to have to think on this a little bit more. And also think about whether I'm pre-framing my thoughts in a way that's not what the game is wanting me to, in terms of like carrying forward this philosophical framework and the idea of the range of GM moves from right soft to hard. Impact moves. Complicate things. Counter, right? This is counter is a move that we saw earlier. Force a choice, hit him hard, lock it in. Impact moves. When not prompted by a roll, impact moves directly against a PC, give them a defense roll, right? The ceiling collapses, raining rocks on you. Make a defense roll. Challenges. This is a framework to represent tasks, obstacles, enemies, and scenarios that have a greater tenacity and complexity than a single action can accomplish. All right, so this is analogous to using obstacle clocks in Blades, is one way we could think about it, knowing that we have pools that are similar but different. Challenges allow you to track progress toward them, but also proactively oppose the PCs. Each has 2 bonus suspense to be spent on moves relating to it. Oh, okay, right, here's a challenge. It has some suspense. It has some hard moves built in that it gets to take because of being a challenge that's introduced. Right, so there's traits. Oh, a challenge has traits, moves, and a fail state. A trigger that signals the challenge failed, like a competing timer pool or a specific event, right? So this is just a specific event. If you roll a Grim, this is a timer. This escaping thief does not have a specific fail state because it's about catching the thief, right? The fail state is you fail to catch the thief, right? There's not like an orthogonal kind of thing. Seems to be how it is, right? It prompts lock it in. It says, boom, this is done. You lose the opportunity, or the thing just resolves. So our challenges, we could have challenges with more or less bonus suspense is a thing we could do. We could increase the dice pool. So let's look at our examples a little more closely. A challenge, navigate channel. It has its bonus suspense. Its traits are shark-infested waters and treacherous currents. This is like fictional positioning, frame the scene. Moves, suggested impact moves they make. These are examples, not limitations, right? Graze the reef, right? Your vessel grazes the reef. There are violent winds. There's a dense fog. And a fail state. So when you introduce navigate channel, I think you should also introduce 60 storm blows in, right? Here's your challenge. Here's your timer. I'm curious whether the GM automatically tells the players about a fail state or the pool, or if that is something that the GM knows. Building challenges. We have assign a task pool, add some traits, list punchy short moves, define a fail state. Players should know the fail state unless mystery is part of the fun, and even then, make clear one is in play. So there's our answer. Not all these parts are needed for a challenge, right? If you don't feel like you need to pre-write out your moves for a challenge, you might just assign a task pool and its traits. Right? If I'm improvising a challenge in the moment, I go, oh yeah, okay, this is going to be a challenge. It's 4D, right? Do I need to define traits or do I just know them in my head? Do I need to define a fail state, or is one already evident and I'll just declare it? Maybe it doesn't have a fail state, right? You want to be able to improvise these. Introduce challenges at times like an impact move is prompted. You foreshadow to give fair warning. You complicate things without warning. The PCs head straight towards trouble on their own. Sure. Linked challenges, right? Boom. We're having another layer of complexity on top of challenged, right? Negotiating peace in a civil war is you have to convince each of these people, right? Each part of the whole has its own proactive presence in the scene. Give them traits that might prompt impact moves triggered by the fiction, right? So if we're trying to negotiate, let's just look at this. Following the death of the Ember Queen, the realm descended into chaos, sparking a long and bloody civil war. The PCs have managed to bring all three sides to the negotiating table, but the road to peace is rocky. They need to each sign off on splitting the realm, right? Okay, we have to negotiate peace in a civil war. We have the three principles in this conflict in the room, but we have to convince each of them to go in for the peace. Hi, the kids are asleep. Yeah, this is fun. I'm really digging how this game is applying structure while maintaining flexibility, right? It's a very different approach to what we did in Daggerheart. I'm not going to say that one is better than the other because I like what we did in Daggerheart, but I also like this and they're just different. So Duchess Lysandra, right? Each of these challenges gets their own bonus suspense. We have a trait, we have a move, and we have a fail trigger, right? Each of them is 4D, leaves the table, right? So there's only so much patience that any of them have, effectively. Conspiracy within the order. We got some flowcharts! That's right. Cleric's obsession with the odd occurrences within his order has consumed him. Missing relics, false prophecies, and altered scriptures. He knows that something is up and is determined to figure it out. So, false prophecies. Okay, but what do you actually mean here? Right, so I think what I'm thinking is that you need to complete false prophecies so that you can then address the high priests. But you also have to find the relics and deal with the altered scriptures, right? Dead end for now. I could use a little bit more unpacking on this, just to be clear what they mean. Okay, right? Here we have an adversary treated as a complex challenge, right? A linked challenge. Rather than each adversary, so this also tells me that adversaries are treated as challenges here because this great red dragon, the claws, the wings, the body, the tail, and their minions are each a challenge, but they're all linked, right? These are all linked to the body, and that frames the body as the most important because it's the highest value of challenge. I would like a little more text about these, right? Tell us that that you can have challenges that have to be addressed sequentially, right? You have to deal with false prophecies before you can deal with the high priests. What happens if I do these other ones, but I don't do this one, right? Just talk about the modularity and flexibility of this at a little bit more depth, or at a little bit more length. Vigilance. Each level of vigilance creates a new dynamic in a scene. Hint, reveal, strike. Against a prowling panther, it's most likely that a farmer gets a hint, a hunter gets a reveal, and a scholar takes a strike. What? Scholar? Okay, the strike is just, it's instantly. It's not more information, it's less. Right, a scholar doesn't even get a hint. Against a duke lying about their lineage, a priest gets a hint, a noble gets a reveal, and a commoner takes a strike, right? The commoner has no clue. Okay, an inkling. Is an inkling less than a hint? Or is an inkling the term that ended up becoming a hint? Foreshadow with a subtle clue. The player gets a single chance to interpret it. They're limited to just one to highlight the natural response of the PC and keep things moving. Player intuition guides the story forward. A correct response leads to a reveal or possibly bypasses the situation. A reveal, you foreshadow with an obvious unveiling of an immediate threat. Yeah, that it is a lot to hold together on Scriven. I'm liking some stuff. The challenge with approaching a game like this with having a lot of structure is that you have to internalize all of the structure or a lot of the structure because it all engages with one another, right? Like if we imagine Blades in the Dark as a big engine, it's got a lot of gears and levers and like straps and things, right? The whole engine moves together because it's constantly feeding back into itself. But that means that you need a functional model of the entire engine in your head to be able to run the whole engine, right? They say this game can collapse back down to the simple action roll, but there's a lot of interlocking, intersecting, orthogonal gears. This informs that. There's a lot of specialized terminology, which kind of refers back to the mental load thing that I was saying. This is only a 140-page book, but it's very dense with here's how to do things, right? Here's how all this stuff fits together. Here's the specific terminology for all these things. Here's 3 versions or 3 gradations of a thing. Excuse me. Often these are, I'm going to describe the range of possibility by dividing it into 3 options, right? Story moves, suspense moves, impact moves, instead of GM moves. They go from softer to harder, right? Having more structure can be helpful sometimes, but it can also sometimes be an obstacle because it takes a lot of fluency to be able to familiarize yourself with the structure and then make transparent the parts of the structure that you don't need, or ignore the parts of the structure that are not relevant at the moment, or have the skill and knowledge to be able to collapse a part of the complex machine down to a simple machine because you don't need all of the interconnected complexity. I don't need this to be a challenge and for there to be a pool here. I'm just going to do this other version of something, right? It's just going to be a defense roll. Right, so again, we have our kind of, here's the thing, and then here's three intensities of the thing, right? This is kind of another magnitude magic matrix. Okay, so that's that. Combat kit. GM tools to create antagonists and combat scenarios quickly. Tier is an opponent's threat roll. Role is a keyword. Battlegrounds make an environment a proactive or obstacle-ridden part of the scene. Mix these for dynamic combats. All right, so we have another toolkit system. Tiers, Mook, Tough, Elite, Boss. Right, this is a little bit like environments. Right, Lair of the Magma Serpent. Features, lava pools, unstable ground. Threats, 4D lava eruptions. This many of this type of enemy, this many of that type of enemy. features are elements likely to impact, right? So lava pools is not a move on its own, but it describes a part of the scene, which then sets you up to be able to use moves if you want to. All right, threats are hazards that present extra dangers. They either get bonus suspense or repeat on a timer. They have a strong proactive presence in the scene. How are these just not challenges? Or are like threats and challenges are two sides of the same coin, right? Bonus suspense or repeat on a timer. Okay, they're like challenges, but they're also not like challenges because the challenges have an auto-fail timer, but these are cyclical, right? 4D waves crashing. It will repeat. Running combats, no turn order, theater of mind. All right, I'm skimming here because I'm trying to move forward to stuff that's a bit more not crunchy mechanical necessarily, but things that are more distinct to chew on. Right, campaign pools. These are timers that pace long-term events. They work like faction pools. Okay, so a faction has a pool that are their objectives, right? So these pools are again being used as an alternative to clocks, right? They have more uncertainty because they rely on dice rolls, but they are inevitably counting down. The thing is, when a pool gets small, or the bigger the pool, the higher the chance that some dice will be lost. But if a dice pool is down to 2, you could just keep rolling 4+. Right? Pools do not automatically end just by acting, except over a long enough time that everything regresses to the mean. Right? A 2D pool will eventually run out, but it might not run out fast enough to work in the game. How many times can you roll a pool without it feeling like it's unending? Right? That's something that has to be figured out in play, and it's going to have different people are going to have different tolerances. All right, so this is campaign faction, Pimptown Powder Pack. It's the Baron, the Baron's troops, and the Druids. The Druids are connected to the Warlord. The Warlord is connected to the Baron and to the Horde. The Horrors are connected to the Barons. So these are all factions, I guess. Yeah, so these are factions, campaign pools. This is I want more text right here or another half page of unpacking. All right, so these are like GM best practices, I guess. Map fiction to rules. Make rulings to fill gaps. Pace the game cinematically. Use the moves or don't. Make moves with impact. Prompt player narration. After a roll, make sure the players narrate how things play out, even on a Grim, right? So the players have that narrative authority. And here's another longer example of play. All right, so we're using pools. Here's the suspense, here's a challenge with its bonus suspense. Next chapter, adventurers, right? So this is character creation. All right, we're creating our party, and then we're creating our characters, right? So we had a summary of character creation earlier, and now we're getting the full details. Right, so these are, okay, it's not 100% just the D&D terms, because this is Berserker instead of Barbarian, right? Bard, Berserker, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Monk, paladin, ranger, rogue, sorcerer, warlock, wizard. So I'm going to keep scrolling because I want to see what else is there. We're coming up on 2 hours. Montage. I do want group montages, page 13. I feel like I want more about montages. Backgrounds. All right. Okay. So background. Name. 3 wises. Here's other ways you can flavor it, right? You might be a spy instead of a charlatan. You might be a pirate instead of a mariner. Heritage Crucible. So here's some charts. Yeah, they're just not giving you the numbers. So they're figure out how you want to roll on this, is what they're saying implicitly. Okay. And then we have the individual playbooks. All right, I'm going to scroll a lot. So this is going to, right, the screen is going to move a bunch real quick because I want to go find the next chapter. Okay. Exploration. It's its own whole chapter. The Grimwild is a chaotic wildland. So, okay, the Grimwild is a completely optional campaign setting or exploration system, right? Because earlier it said there is no one setting. Here they're saying here is a setting if you want it. Or you can apply Grimwild as like a mentality to talk about how exploration works in your own setting. But the Grimwild is a chaotic wildland. If your setting is not a chaotic wildland, maybe you don't want to use this subsystem. It's a long corridor spanning harsh terrain. To enter the fog and leave the Grimwild is to risk becoming lost forever. Okay, so these are like, hey, do you want to use this? Here's how this is set up. Here are the basic assumptions of this. So here are basic truths. We have the remnants, the wilds, the ruins. This is an anti-canon kind of approach. Anti-canon being a term I hear more frequently associated with like OSR, where it's like, here's a bunch of things, but there's no one way for it to be. Anti-canon also shows up in like The Wildlands by Felix Isaacs. Seasons. So structure. Exploration map. We have some moves, subsystems. We use tokens for exploration. Okay. I think I've about hit my capacity for taking in information for today. I'm going to probably want to go and look at the exploration system on my own. Exploration is not a part of fantasy adventure gameplay that I am as keen on, but that makes me want to look at exploration systems to see if somebody has figured out a way of presenting it that would be more interesting to me. Right? Can I get excited about exploration if it's presented like this? And so we have maps. Okay, here's a way of describing a region, and we have a key to just talk about the different ways that this can be. And we have, leave blank spaces kind of the stuff. All right, I'm going to zip through some more. Monsters. Okay, so here's our enemy write-up. Right, so they don't have hit points, right? Here's some color. We're giving you a little bit of a color palette. We have description. We have traits. We have threats or their moves. Desires, right? It wants this, it doesn't want that. What it looks like, what it sounds like. Feeling, and a chart for how you might find it. Okay? It's nice to have some evocative material here, right? On a scale of totally freeform fantasy adventure play pretend to Pathfinder 2nd edition. There's probably crunchier stuff than Pathfinder 2nd edition. It's just not anything that I really engage with. On a scale from completely freeform to very crunchy. This game feels like it is a step closer to freeform than Daggerheart, but more crunchy than some other story fantasy games, right? Okay, this is a D&D-ish thing, but it's really pretty story light, or pretty rules light. Daggerheart is a kind of a middle ground between a D&D-ish crunch and story game kind of loosey-goosiness. This game is calibrated to hit a little bit different. It feels a little bit more like an evolution from Dungeon World into Forged in the Dark, which makes sense because Dungeon World was listed as one of the major touchstones. I'm getting some of the Burning Wheel, because Burning Wheel is a incredibly complicated system. But what I hear is that when you have the whole thing in your head, it runs beautifully. And I think that this Grimwild might be a game like that, where if it works for you and you've internalized everything, it really will flow easily, because there's like fractal complexity, right? There's a system, and within that there's granularity, but there's a kind of the overall system and what that does. All right, bigger enemy. It's a complicated challenge on its own, right? You have to overcome each of these things, right? Demonic magic. I guess everything connects to something, and I don't totally know the lines here. Like, what does this really mean? That demonic magic is not connected to Crackling Sword. Demonic magic, I guess, if you destroy the head, does that automatically get rid of demon magic? Right? If you destroy the body, do you only have to destroy the body? Do you have to destroy the demon magic first? All right, what are we saying here? I don't know how these things are continuous. Unscriven seems ideal for a companion app. Yeah, I think I could imagine a strong suite of virtual tools to support this. I don't know much about this design company, so I don't know, right? We know that they did a Kickstarter, or they did a backer kit campaign and got $41,000, almost $42,000 against an original goal of $5,000. So that's a great result. I have not looked at where this is necessarily all going, right? We see that there's modules, right? And then there's some other stuff. I'm not sure about the VTT support, right? They have a Discord. I could go to the Discord and ask all these questions, and I might do that. I have plenty of things to do, but right, there's enough in here that I'm curious about, that I'm going to want to keep on engaging with it to some degree. All right, bunch of different enemies, and I'm going to scroll through them much faster. Dragon breath weapons. Okay, yep, that makes sense. All right, we're getting a lot of enemies here, right? We're getting a bunch of examples. They don't need individual stats, but what we're getting is, hey, this is just really easy to pick up and go, right? Here's a griffin. These are all the things you need to think about with a griffin. We've written them out instead of you just having to think about them yourself. All right, so that's nice that there's kind of offloaded cognitive load, right? So a fire giant, douse the flames of war, head and magic, body and prowess. Sorry. Okay, so the giant is really big, so it's got two things. And then there's also the lair is its own threat or challenge, right? I'm not keeping track of all these terms together. This is a progression, right? You have to go to you get through the outer courtyard, then the icy halls, then the frozen throne room, right? That arrow, that makes sense to me. That's easy to kind of interpret. Here, it seems like you need to get through the basic concept, then what it wants, and then you seal the deal. various hags, Hydra, right? These all being interconnected in a more complicated way. That's fine, right? That makes sense because they're Hydras, right? The heads swirl around. Oh, so this one, right? Some of the heads do different things, right? This watches behind and cuts off escapes. That's kind of fun. Okay, I'm going to go faster. This is a lot of adversaries. Okay, so now we're at story kits, right? This is a whole other thing that I was interested in, right? Story kits are modular, do-it-yourself scenarios designed to spark your creativity and get your imagination racing. They're not fully fleshed out adventures. They're flexible frameworks loaded with evocative ideas, dramatic moments, and narrative twists. I could probably do a whole separate stream just on these. So I think we're going to stop here. I would like to come back to this. I cannot promise I will do it because my schedule is very question mark up in the air right now. But what I will do is I'm going to remind everybody that you can get this 140-page book for free. They did this crowdfunder to pay for physical editions and to fund these additional things, but you can just go to Drive-Thru RPG. I'm going to put the link in the chat here. Right? I didn't pay for this book. I got the free edition, and I've just been reading from that, which is part of why I felt comfortable just showing everything here, right? Because you can just go get it for free. So a story kit, right? We've got some progression. We've got some that's set up, right? So being able to fit it all on one page is great. I'm hoping that there's more unpacking here, but we'll see. I didn't even really look at the sheets much. This is very interesting. I like the kind of vantage, I guess is their term, right? The vantage that the team has brought to this in thinking about how do we condense and contextualize the spread of realities and challenges and aspects in a fantasy adventure game, but avoid a certain type of complexity, right? There's complexity and difficulty, and then there's, right, mechanical complexity and conceptual complexity. But it feels like the team here has focused on keeping one of those dimensions of like difficulty in keeping track of stuff. They're trying to constrain that way, but then they're creating, by differentiating and labeling a bunch of things, there's a lot of stuff to keep track of and to think about and internalize. And so I would definitely need to spend more time with this. I would love to play this. Hey, if you're one of the designers and you're watching this, get in touch with me. I'm on Blue Sky at mikeRunderwood.bsky.social. If you're in a place to get me a place at a table to play a one-shot or want to run the game for me, I'm very interested in trying to play this. I think it will be much easier for me to understand the game if I get to play it first rather than what I often do, which is I read a thing and I go, okay, I have to run this because I'm the person who's interested in making this be a thing. And then by running it, I understand it to a certain way. And there's definitely GM stuff going on that I would want to wrap my head around. But I think maybe it would be easier to wrap my head around it as a player and then move into being a GM. I don't want to just play fantasy adventure games all year this year because I'm going to be running and playing a lot of Daggerheart with its release scheduled for spring 2025, for which I am extremely excited, partially because I really like fantasy adventure games, and working on Daggerheart was a great way of getting to kind of make a game that does what I want a fantasy adventure game to do, right? Now, on that game, I was a additional designer, not a lead designer, right? So I'm serving another designer and a company's overall creative and their creative goals. But I did get to kind of advocate for and help build support for a game working kind of the way that I want it to. This is also very interesting and seems pretty promising to me. But we didn't quite get through everything. I want to go and look what this last chapter is. We had all these story kits. Nope, that's just art. What is our last chapter? Extras. Okay. And then, yes, buy Grimwild to unlock this chapter. Right. This reminding you that there's extra book if you pay for it. Right. And then that's the end. Again, this is from Oddity Press. And I guess this is the illustrator. So once more, this has been Grimwild, the free edition. This is a 140-page PDF you can get for free right now. The publisher is Oddity Press, and this has been very interesting to me. I will keep on chewing on this, but I'm going to stop the stream now so I can stop talking and preserve my voice.